Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we are continuing our breakdowns of the AP Top 25 after a crazy week 6 of college football. There's been a ton of movement, as you can see. By number 25, James Madison from the Sun Belt Conference makes it into the top 25 this week. Not something I think we were expecting to see heading into this weekend. Obviously, James Madison typically doesn't get the love I would say that they would deserve, even when they have good records. But here they are, 25th now. We've also got some interesting teams in the others receiving votes category. Look at UNC, Baylor, BYU, Coastal Carolina, Notre Dame, who had a big win this week. There's a lot of interesting teams. I recommend looking through the others receiving votes category right now. But Austin, James Madison at number 25, they're 5-0 with a huge win over Arkansas State by 22 points. How surprised and impressed are you by their season so far up to this point?
Yeah, James Madison, obviously a huge victory. Sun Belt Conference getting a little bit of representation. Big credit to how big they've won in their games. And I think that's really the only pathway for a team like James Madison to get so much respect at this point in the season. Generally, when you're looking at the Sun Belt, they're not going to be giving AP top 25 recognition unless they've really beat teams bad, and that's been the case for James Madison. Just touching on the others receiving votes. LSU falling out once again here. They got absolutely crushed by Tennessee. Hendon Hooker had a huge day. LSU just couldn't move the ball effectively, and that's been no surprise to me. Once again, you have Coastal Carolina, BYU taking a big time loss, which was frustrating for them because they had put together such a good season to this point.
Right. James Madison, their first season at the FBS level. And this is the first time they've been ranked at the FBS level in the top 25 by the Associated Press poll. Absolutely crazy. Huge shout out to that program. And as we move up ahead of them now into the top 24, look at number 24. We got the Fighting Illini here representing the Big Ten after a 9-6 win against Iowa. I wouldn't quite call that one a shootout this week. Then at 23 here, we have Kentucky. 22, Texas, who had a massive, and I mean massive win over Oklahoma. We'll talk more about that game specifically. Cincinnati moves up 3 spots here despite only a 4-point win against South Florida. A big reason for that is a lot of the teams ahead of them ended up falling out with some bad losses. Utah at number 20, and then Kansas. They lose, but they stay up in the top 20 here at number 19. Awesome. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on here. In this grouping, 3 teams that lost this week, 1 team that only won by 4 against an unranked opponent. Do you think they got this right here on your initial look at this 24 through 19 range?
Yeah, kind of difficult to kind of dissect what's gone on here. I'm surprised Kansas didn't move down. It took a lot for them to move up, obviously being at 19 to begin with, but for them not to drop it all is kind of shocking. Granted, they had a pretty good game against TCU, and TCU is going to get some love, and you will see that, a little later on, but I'm shocked that they didn't move at all. But there was, like you said, a lot of teams that were in that top 20 that had lost, therefore bumping them down even further. Kentucky being the latest example, taking a tough loss against South Carolina. Texas, big statement win. Now, I think if had that game been, a 21-17 win, nobody's really going to bat an eye at that. But with how convincing they were, especially offensively, moving the ball, Quinn Ewers, that's the reason they're here at 22. Sometimes it's about style points actually in college football in terms of these rankings, which people will say that's not the case, but sometimes it really does depend on how much they beat a team by and how convincing it is to them. So that's part of it. Kentucky started off so hot, and now they're continuing to tumble down these rankings. Cincinnati again, they're just hanging there. I think last year is part of the reason they're getting a lot of credit still. Part of it is they lost a lot of guys to the NFL. Luke Fickell's done a really nice job, even with that turnaround and that turnover of players, keeping them relevant.
Right, he definitely has. And Texas, I think, is really the most interesting team to me in this grouping. You see them ranked at 22. Again, they won by 7 touchdowns against Oklahoma. Austin, how many times have you hit the panic button already on Oklahoma? And do you think had Quinn Ewers not gotten hurt against Alabama, that Texas would maybe even be 5-1 up to this point? And do you think that they should be higher, arguably?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, kind of looking at this overall overarching circumstances of this team, Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt. I really do think Texas probably wins that game. Honestly, I think he's the big difference maker there, able to unleash that offense a little bit more. Oklahoma, that it's concerning. It's very, very concerning. I didn't think they'd struggle this bad, losing Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. Wow. It's inexcusable to the point where I know Dylan Gabriel's been dealing with some injuries, but at the end of the day, it really, there's no excuse for where they're at right now.
Right. I think Oklahoma is a really good example of how important a QB and a coach can be to a program. And I think they are the prime example of that this year. Moving up into the top 18, now we have Syracuse there at 5-0 with a 59-point win over Wagner. It feels like every single week we talk about a team beating Wagner by like 50 points. Just another example of that here. Syracuse is for real. Not much to add to that. And then we go up into the top 17. Kansas State here with a 1-point win over Iowa State, 10-9. Mississippi State wins over Arkansas, 40-17. And then NC State gets a very narrow win over Florida State, 19-17. Wake Forest wins. And there's TCU. You said we're going to give them some praise in this video. Here they are at 13 with a 7-point win over Kansas, like we talked about earlier. And then Oregon at 12, 49-22 win over Arizona, really putting their best foot forward in the Pac-12 up to this point. They've played really well the last 5 weeks. Obviously, week 1 against Georgia really got out of hand, but they've kind of cleaned some things up. Austin, 17-12, what do you like in this group? Is there a team that we could see potentially jump into the top 10 later on?
There's a team that's definitely caught my eye, and in a very, very tough conference in the SEC. That's Mississippi State. Will Rogers was absolutely on fire, on Saturday, getting the huge win against a pretty competent Arkansas team, a team that we saw ranked early on in the season, has dropped a couple of games to some talented teams. Nevertheless, I think they could straighten out their season, but Mississippi State in this air raid offense under Mike Leach is a huge difference maker. Will Rogers is the perfect scheme fit quarterback for this system. And I think Mississippi State can continue to climb. However, with the rest of their schedule, it might be a little more difficult. I think they're a very talented team on paper. They have a great passing attack, and they're starting to balance the run a little bit more. Will Rogers and his efficiency in this offense is absolutely through the roof. This is a team you need to keep your eye on. That's not to say that they won't lose again, because playing in the SEC, there's a lot of competitive teams, but this is a team that's been, definitely swept, under the rug a little bit over the last couple of weeks. K-State, another team I want to bring up. Deuce Vaughn, one of the best running backs in the entire country, standing all of 5'8", 5'9". This guy can absolutely move. He's a lightning bug. I love Kansas State, grinding out a tough win against Iowa State. Not a lot of offense in that game, but nevertheless, K-State was impressive. TCU, big win over Kansas, and then Oregon. You look at that win against Arizona. It doesn't move the needle a ton, but they're starting to figure things out, start to get into a little more of an offensive rhythm here, and they've, the AP seems to stand at them at 12.
A lot of credit to the Horned Frogs specifically. Sonny Dykes has really turned that program around since arriving there. Obviously, last year was just a brutal year for them. This year, they started out 5-0 with some convincing wins in there. Moving up into the top 11 now. At number 11, we see UCLA, the Bruins at 6-0. Again, another Pac-12 team. The Pac-12 is back and better this year for sure. They had a nice win over Utah that bumped Utah down the rankings quite a bit. Then 10, Penn State. Number 9, Ole Miss. 8, Oklahoma State. And 7, USC. There's that combination you were talking about earlier, Austin, from what Oklahoma lost. What do you like in this grouping? Do you think that they got the rankings right here? We see USC and Oklahoma State both fall one spot this week despite winning.
Yeah, let's address UCLA. Pick up the huge win against Utah. A lot of people were favoring Utah in that game. UCLA being at home. DTR was almost perfect in that. Very efficient throwing the football. I believe he had 4 touchdowns in that game as well. There's a lot to love about what you saw from him in that game, really making his progressions. Look at Penn State picking up the win against Northwestern. Penn State is kind of trying to be the product here of, staying consistent, just hanging around, not absolutely, being super flashy about it, but Penn State football is just so good under James Franklin. You look at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is doing their thing in the SEC. Once again, exceeding expectation. That has been Lane Kiffin's MO so far throughout the season, and he's just going to quietly, continue to make this program super, super competitive. Oklahoma State, they drop a spot here. They pick up a nice win against Texas Tech. You look at Mike Gundy and what he's been able to do with this program, especially more specifically the last 2 years. You look at his tenure at Oklahoma State. He's had good programs. He's had very, very good teams. But I look at this Oklahoma State team as Spencer Sanders' progression as a passer, especially this season, I think will make the difference. The last couple of seasons, he struggled throwing the football, picked up a little bit better at the end of last year, but that's where you see this team is making a little bit more of a jump, despite them losing Jaylen Warren to the the Pittsburgh Steelers eventually here. But Oklahoma State still looking good. And then USC, that Pac-12, they are, the golden child of that conference right now. They are looking good. They're looking scary. And they, had a very nice game against Washington State.
Right, there's a ton of talent here. As you look at the top 11, all of these teams so far are undefeated, which is really going to make conference championship games important down the stretch of the year. As we move up into the top 6 now, Austin, this is where the going really gets tough in here. Tennessee had a huge win over LSU, who was ranked last week at number 25. Of course, LSU no longer ranked. They're barely receiving votes, even if you remember that from the beginning of the video. Tennessee here 5-0, Michigan 6-0, Clemson 6-0. And here at this spot, Clemson finally jumps ahead of Michigan. We read your comments from last week. A lot of you were surprised that Clemson did not move above Michigan last week, just with some of the degree of difficulty in some of their wins. This week, they beat Boston College by 28, and the AP Top 25 poll finally agrees with some of our viewers here and moves Clemson into that number 4 spot right now, which is obviously a really fun spot to watch, that 4-5 mix, especially when it comes to college football playoff implications. Obviously, the AP Top 25 poll doesn't have the final say, but it is somewhat indicative of what the potential results could be. And Clemson right now over Michigan, Austin, 4-6. Did they get this right?
Yeah, I think so. From what we've seen this weekend, Clemson was so dominant here, 31-3. You look at Michigan, picking up the good win against Indiana. And then also Tennessee's victory against LSU was insane. They were able to throw the football effectively. Once again, Hendon Hooker, huge day against LSU. LSU could not move the football. They couldn't stop anything either. So I think they got it right here. Clemson's defensive front is so tough. Myles Murphy is one of those big time contributors. Brian Brzee as well. Those are 2 NFL level prospects that very well both could go in the first round. There's so much talent up front. It's very tough to run on them. It's tough to throw on them. I think that's more of a product of, the Clemson hasn't been getting the respect that they, maybe should have this season because of what happened last year. I think that's still in the back of, voters' minds on the offense and, how stale the passing game was. Definitely picking up though at this point.
Right. You can see the parity right now in college football as well. From 4 to 8, we have 5 different conferences represented: ACC, Big 10, SEC, Pac-12, Big 12. Just crazy how talented right now college football is across the board. And then we get into the top 3, and this is the top 3 that has been really running the show all year. We're going to have Alabama down at number 3, actually, after a 4-point win over Texas A&M, who came into the week unranked. Funny, last year, Alabama received a lot of flack after losing to Texas A&M, and this week it looks like they received a lot of flack for narrowly beating A&M this time around. Ohio State moves up to number 2 with a 29-point win over Michigan State. The Spartans just haven't looked as good this year as they were last season. The Gophers got their way with them. Now the Buckeyes do as well. And then number 1, Georgia, 32-point win over Auburn, re-cementing themselves as the number 1 team in the nation right now. Do you think Ohio State has a bone to pick here that, hey, maybe we should be the number 1 team in the nation? And did they get this right with Alabama down to 3 just based on this week alone?
Yeah, I think Alabama, this is more of a product of the entire season rather than just more specifically this week, because I'm going to be honest, Texas A&M, was right there about to score and they threw it away essentially on the final play. Had that play gone differently, this is a whole different conversation. Alabama is not even close to 3 at that point then. I definitely think they fall dramatically had they lost that game on 1 throw. But once again, Ohio State's CJ Stroud had a 6-touchdown performance. There's a lot to love about how efficient this offense is because they can run the football. They go out to play action a ton. They have a ton of talent at the receiver position. So much to love about this Ohio State team. But when you look at the cream of the crop, I mean, Georgia is so tough to beat. They had a very narrow victory, last week. Not narrow, but I mean, it should have been much more than what it was. But looking at Georgia, they got back on track here against Auburn. You look at Brock Bowers at tight end. He's a special talent. They can run the ball very, very effectively. That's exactly why Georgia is up here, is because not their offense, but their defense is absolutely stifling up front.
The top 3, so incredibly talented, and 4 through 11, 4 through 12, even, you could argue, have really good legitimate cases to being one of the best team, if not the best team in the nation right now. A ton of talent in college football. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe for more. We do these videos every single week when the AP Top 25 poll comes out. So this is a great place to be subscribed to not miss out on the latest in college football. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.